And now I'm very happy to introduce the first keynote of this day. And guess what? I think we could learn something from French people. Did I say that? Okay, I'm very happy to introduce Stéphane Rappeneau now, who is in charge of the game studio financing at Société Générale. He's a financing expert also for the National French Game Dev Association. And in 2018, he led the first group sponsoring of the French esports team Gamers Origin. He regularly tweets on game industry and advises in the studio on his spare time on business development. And Stéphane initiated and developed a program at Société Générale that we found very inspiring, coming from a private bank. And that's why we asked Stéphane to tell us a bit more about his experience. Stéphane, welcome, and we are listening to you.
Hi everyone. Thanks a lot, Odile, for introducing me and actually us, because I'm sitting close to Hugo Trojani. Actually, I'm leaving Société Générale group tomorrow at the end of a 20 years career. I'm joining a big AA studio as a CFO, and Hugo will replace me. And actually, almost everything that you talked about at Société Générale, Odile, I did it with Hugo, whom I've known for 25 years. So I'm super happy that he can replace me. Starting on what we're doing in the game industry. Wait a second. Okay, so why are we here and why SocGen is here? I guess you've all seen that graphic, that chart before. Gaming has become the #1 entertainment industry in the world, with revenues approaching the $200 billion and growing continuously over the year, with also excellent perspective in the 3 to 5 years to come. It's also one of the industry that was really resilient during the COVID crisis, which is nowhere, for which there is no end in sight. So that's why everyone is interested in the area right now. So at Société Générale, what was how did we manage to do something in that industry? So during the year 2000 to 2010, like many major banks in the world, we were financing the cinema industry through finance structures called slate financing. They were operated by our TMT, so Telecom, Media, and Tech division, and we've had famous clients such as EuropaCorp, the company of Luc Besson, and a few other ones. After the subprimes, we left that area because it was there were a few problems around it, a few legal problems, and also the business was estimated to be too small for our bank. So we paused for a few years, and in 2017, with Hugo, we pitched the Exco the possibility to partner and sponsor an esports team, which was a growing phenomenon, and it was a way to rejuvenate our audience and show that as a major bank and an old industry, we were still able to adapt. This was within a program of internal startup, and that's what we launched with Hugo. So after that, after the sponsoring was signed, and actually it's still very much alive and kicking right now, because we sponsor lots of initiatives in the video game industry in France. Also, we have a presence in Asia. We are exploring things in Africa. So, I mean, beyond the pure image partnering and sponsorship initiative, the management asked us to develop a real financing business with the game industry. At heart, at the origin of that initiative, the motivation was that video game industry does not work a lot with the banks. I think the French National Game Dev Association published a study, actually every year, showing that banks contribute only 4% of the game financing. So obviously there was an opportunity for us as an investment bank, but we needed to clear a few prerequisites. So the first one is that we need to prove the management that the game industry is big enough. 10 years ago, it was really considered a niche. And today, even with $200 billion yearly revenues, it's still considered a small business. It has become quite sizable. The biggest companies such as Ubisoft, Voodoo, Blizzard are very much in our target as an investment bank. But for the majority of studios and publishers are still considered as SME, small and medium companies. The second point is that we need to, as a global bank, to understand whether we want to manage the game industry as a retail industry in our retail segment, so SMEs, or in our investment investment bank. And those are, I think, very much the questions that every global bank, including the most active in this industry, Barclays, JP Morgan, Credit Suisse also, they are trying to find the right angle to work with the gaming industry. The second prerequisite that we needed to clear is that for a long time, the game industry was considered as entertainment and not very serious. There were some image risk before the Wii. Game was still considered also as a niche entertainment with very lots of caricatures and geeky image. So we needed the top management of the bank to accept the fact that this was an industry like any other industry with needs to get financed, and it was serious business. And now that it reaches that amount of money, this is considered as a serious business. You also need people internally ready to carry that topic until up to the exco level. The second point is that beyond the management acceptability, obviously you need to show our risk department, because we are talking about financing business, that the major gatekeepers are the risk departments, that make sure that as a systemic bank, we do not, we understand the level of financial risk, counterparty and credit risk that we take by developing the activity. So basically, it took almost 4 years, but we've cleared all those questions with our management. Initially, we started working with Steam and PC market, which we actually loved more than the others, but we quickly pivoted to mobile industry because for many reasons. Actually, now that the distribution of games and the marketing are mostly digital, they create enormous amount of data, and especially we can observe almost in real time the mobile gaming revenues. As we have all those data, we created predictive models which enable us to predict the risk with enough margin to be comfortable to be able to lend to studio. The last element is that as the revenue stream are due to the monopoly of platforms centralized, we are able to pledge and consolidate, and we are able to use the revenues as a collateral for any lending purpose. So that's what we developed. We developed first user acquisition financing offer, and we are currently developing another generic purpose financing. So what we do is that we leverage on lots of very standard KPI that people in the mobile industry know very well: the LTV, the CPI, the ROAS. Basically, half of our team are data scientists. They've made hybrid and various predictive and simulating model that enable us to predict the future revenues over as much as 12 months. And on top of that, we've created an automated credit approval chain, which enable us to provide an answer to any credit request within 10 minutes and without any human intervention. So in addition to that, we have developed, so we are in effect the first bank in the world to develop a UA financing model for the video game industry, although there are between 5 and 10 fintech operating in that department. As a whole, as we are a global bank, we are able to finance from the smallest indie studio through our retail network until publicly listed companies such as Ubisoft, possibly Voodoo one day, Blizzard, etc. So as a global bank, we are really able to support growing companies during the whole course of their development. We've developed gaming Visa cards. We work with a relationship with the Game Day National Association. We have a monthly newsletter covering the key news for the game industry, and we are also sponsor for the French Pegasus Awards, which is the which is the equivalent of the Oscar Award for the French for the games developed in France. So 3 years after that travel, what is our return on experience? We organized it under the form of a SWOT. So our strength, and actually it's both our experience, but I think it might be helpful for any private global bank and private financer to understand the perspectives and also difficulties of that industry. So our strength is that we are a global bank. We have a recognized brand. So this helps a lot to meet the biggest companies, and I think it's also very comforting when you are a small company to know that I mean, at least we've been here for almost 200 years, so the people know us, especially in France. Second strength is that we have a definite, a very good sector and data expertise. We've worked now for 3 years with various models and PC on mobile. We know exactly how the CPI, ROAS, how they behave. So we have lots of benchmark in mind. We have benchmark data points under the form of data points, which help us also in measuring and backtesting our models. So this helps a lot, but it takes a bit of time. The weakness is that the market is still very fragmented. As you know, 90% of the revenues are made by the 50 to top 100 games. And if you want to help the smaller companies grow, you definitely have you definitely need to be able to deal with thousands of companies. Each of them require a certain cost to onboard. And I mean, no client has the same strategy, so it's a fragmented market. And the second point is that the business models, especially in the game industry, change all the time. 10 years ago, we had the premium. 7 years ago, we had the freemium. 3 years ago, we've had the hyper casual and ad revenue-based business model. Now you have the recurring revenues. You have the battle pass. You have the Google and Apple monopoly is starting to dwindle a bit. So all of those require a constant adaptation. Maybe in the future we will have NFTs. So this require really very up-to-date knowledge to be able, at least, also to understand the risks. The opportunities is that it's definitely a booming industry. Supported by public sectors, especially, I think during our last meeting, Peter Warman from Yuzu said that European managed to create the majority of IPs in the gaming industry, but then those IPs and knowledge and best studios get bought by Chinese or American capital. This is still the case today, and I think what Spielfabrik and the rest of us today are doing is trying to boost the European industry and trying to keep our assets within European walls. The second point is that as the game industry is maturing, finance is increasingly getting a competitive advantage for both studio and publishers. It means that game industry is starting to get more and more financialized, and also there are more and more non-gaming financial actors that are getting into that space, which is both news and which also creates the need to get people who are in between those worlds to be able to circulate information. The threat is that European private sector, as I said, is largely behind the US and Asia, and I know that the majority of Tencent and NetEase, Garena transactions are not public, but I can guarantee you that they speak and purchase minority or majority stakes in studio every week in France. And the second point is that, as I said, platform monopolies are starting to show cracks, but they are still very much the norm. Apple, Google, and Facebook are still too powerful, and I think they are still preventing, especially financing actors, to enter that area easily. I can give you an example. If, as a bank, we need to pledge the revenues of a studio, then we need to have some kind of agreement from Apple and Google, and they don't allow that kind of stuff. On their administrative platform, they don't make the switch very easy, and they are very much keeping the bulk of data private. So that's it. If we have 2 minutes left, if there are any questions, we'll gladly take those.
Well, thanks a lot for that. My name is Per Strömbäck. I've been introduced by Odile, and Felix mentioned me as well. It's great to be here. Coming to you live from Berlin this morning. And yes, thanks so much for for sharing your experience as a bank in this sector. And since we have a minute, I might like to ask you a couple of questions before we move to our first panel of the day. That was a very convincing and interesting case from the perspective of the bank. But how has this been received by the industry? And do you find it easy to find cases to invest in and work with?
Essentially in France with our existing network, because we know quite a bit of people in France and studio, and we have been very well received. In Europe, based on opportunities, attending meetings such as business events, such as Pocket Gamer Connect, we have been very well received because for once the studio know that the bank speak the same language as them. We know their difficulties, we know their business models. We have a risk assessment model which is actually very close to the one that publishers use on mobile. So the reception has been good. However, the maturity of the average, every publicly listed companies, Gameloft, they have a CFO, which is our regular contacts, which is very easy to talk for them. But in the mobile industry, there is still lots of VC money available. And we have lots of studios that still raise money to invest in user acquisition funding, and which is, in our opinion, an error, because and this is more like a maturity issue, because if you borrow equity money, if you get equity money to invest in marketing, then you will have huge requirements in terms of return on equity. And getting debt as a leverage ratio on your equity is far easier to repay. And I think our analysis is that it is really a matter of financial maturity. And in the years to come, when other banks will start providing that kind of product, this is actually what we understand also as being the revenue-based financing, which is somewhat still a new word, and which will develop in the years to come. But when every bank will provide this kind of product, mobile studio and possibly in the future BC studio will get used to getting this kind of financing instrument, and they will, and also the VC money will have moved elsewhere. Maybe the future will be metaverse, NFT, renewable energy. So once the VC money becomes sparser, and the head of studio will be more acquainted to revenue-based financing, then it will be the best time for us. But right now, even if the reception is good, the deal flow is not as good as what we'd like.
Okay, thank you so much. That's a lot of good pointers for us to continue to discuss in the upcoming panels. And I definitely agree that sometimes we focus a lot on investment in production, but of course user acquisition and marketing is just as important. Well, with that, I want to thank our friends from Société Générale for joining us this morning.